You guys have a clear view. Am I in the way of the camera? I don't think so. I see you in the camera. Oh, I don't want to be in the camera.
Well, that's about.
If it wasn't,
You're still in the camera.
I think I saw a
Wide
Saturday Night
angle.
Live that he
Next to your
hosted.
camera.
He has a hard time being funny because he's such a good actor.
Oh, thank you.
Right, like he can't even act as like he's got to be somebody else. Yeah. You know who's really good on Saturday Night Live is the guy in Game of Thrones. Peter Dinklage, I think. Yeah. Peter Dinklage, is that his name? Yeah, he was so good on Saturday Night Live. He was really funny.
I haven't watched Saturday Night Live.
I just occasionally will stream.
Yeah.
Oh, I like this host stuff.
Yeah.
Or
I used
watch
to
it.
watch it every week.
Back when it was systematic. I'll wait for Al to get back. I think we're missing one more person that was here. That's in the restroom.
To be fair, like, how do you do a robot voice that's also kind of start being funny?
Yeah,
It's a little hard to ask. I just got me watching that show, Richmond. I'm like, well, at least I can get a little bit of Bender vicariously.
All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's about 15 after. If the people come in, they can just join in. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I completely made this name up as being the Columbus Docker user group. If we keep doing it, then I'll keep calling it that. Maybe we'll call it CoDud or something if we want to. But I wanted to put this together today about explaining more around building. So we're not going to be talking, I could probably fill a whole other hour or two on running Docker containers and orchestration, but today is really going to focus on building. I'll get into why more here as I go through this, but a little bit about me, some introductions. I'm Ed LeGault. I came up as a Java developer. I've turned into the DevOps, continuous integration, continuous delivery process glue guy, I call myself. I wind up, when I go into a given project, I might do a little bit of coding, I might do a little bit of this or that, but at the end of the day, I found myself taking what got written and getting it built and getting it tested and getting it deployed and just getting everything glued together. So I kind of end up trying to describe myself more as a glue guy before DevOps names got all twisted around in definitions. And I love Docker a lot, like I like to do this part. So I continually here at Leading Edge get accused of being this guy. Because it's been said if you say the word Docker 3 times, I appear. I end up using Docker so much in my daily work that anytime there's a Docker question or anything that comes up, people come to me. So it winds up anytime I'm across a room and I hear the Docker word, I wind up, hey, what are we talking about? Right? So I've become a big fan of it because I am that glue guy. When you wind up maintaining the build server or you wind up needing to help out, how do we get this project we're building to do CI in a way that's going to be easy to have it tested and have it get deployed and have consistency is why I've really started to lean on Docker and containerization heavily for that. And that's why we're going to focus today, why I wanted to present some best practices, tips, and tricks around building. So here's our agenda. I'm kind of already done the welcome part of it. We're going to get into why I wanted to go through this today. Lay a little groundwork for those of you that might be new to Docker, because we're going to talk a lot about building. So I got to talk about what that is really quick. Unless you know all about it, then you can ignore me for a few minutes. Then we'll get into the best practices, tips, and tricks. I really almost didn't call it best practices because I want to say now I want this to be more collaborative. As all of us do Docker and containers more and more, there's probably use cases and things that you've run into that I haven't or I have that you haven't, where we can help each other. So if you see something or be like, hey, I've actually done it this way, feel free to throw it out there. I'm not up here trying to act like I'm an expert by any means. I'm just trying to share, hey, in an enterprise space, we ran into this, or make sure you do that. So if you happen to throw something out there, feel free, right? I'm not up here trying to say, this is exactly how you need to do all of this, right? I'm trying to help.
You're going to put it on the slide share.
Yeah, it'll be all on the slides.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
And then we'll have an open discussion and questions. So why did I want to go over building and what we're going to talk about today? Well, I found that we need to go beyond hello world. If you've done Docker tutorials, they're usually pretty simplistic, and they show you a Docker file, and you build that Docker image, and you go run it, you go sweet, or you go run something, and at the end of the day, there's more than one way to get an image built. You can get it to build just fine, and it'll work just fine. If you're messing around doing a pet project on your own, and you don't have to worry about enterprise level things like an image gets built 50 times a day, or is contributed to by 20 different developers, or size of what gets pushed to the repo and push and pull times. That's why I want to go over a lot of this today, because these are some of the considerations. Once you move from something you've messed with locally, yeah, this is kind of cool, you get asked to do it at a bigger enterprise level where you got to support a whole team. These are some of the things you got to think about. And like I said, we want to shorten those build times. Smaller images are always better, and we'll go over how you can accomplish that. And that speed and size is definitely important to CI/CD as we move toward wanting to build and stand up multiple things and test them and tear them down, which containers give us that ability. These considerations come into play, and you learn something new every day. I know I do. I learned something today. Like, oh, hey, cool, I didn't know it did that. So I wanted to show some of that to you guys. Hopefully, maybe you guys will show some of that to me as well. So that's why I wanted to go through and talk about this today. So to lay a little groundwork, again, if you've done this before, I apologize, but I just wanted to make sure, for those of you that are fairly new to Docker, what building an image means, right? So images are built using the Docker build command, and it uses a Docker file that we're going to reference heavily in this talk that is more like a recipe for here's what all I want my image to contain and what I want it to do and this and that when I then go to run it as a container. The build command takes one argument, which is the directory that's used as the build context. We're also going to talk about that a decent amount. When you do Docker build, you can do -t to give it a tag, primarily what a lot of people do, but then the one argument you give it is the build context. And that directory contains a file named Docker file, unless you use -f and you can call it whatever you want. But we're going to be talking about the Docker file. We're also going to be talking about the context, so I kind of wanted to lay that out there. And this is the basic, probably 80% of if you Google, how do I build a Docker image the first time, this is one of the boilerplate examples you'll see. If you've never seen one before, they almost always start out with a from line. It's from another image. They're from Docker Hub, or you can have them in your own local repo, or your own repo if you have one. This one is going from Nginx, and we're exposing port 80. More on that later. And then we're doing a couple copy commands. We're saying, copy my configuration into this location, copy my index.html into this location. Very simple, right? 4 lines. Hey, I can go run this in a tutorial, and boom, I got an Nginx up with my index.html page in it. Sweet. This is as bare bones basic a Docker file as you can possibly get, but I wanted to show you guys this, and then we're going to expand on that as we move forward. So talking about one of the first things we need to do as a best practice is considering optimizing the build context. And like I said, that build context represents the directory that anything within the Docker file can reference. So when it does copy commands, things like that, it's relative to that directory. So you might have already figured out, maybe on your own or just to tell you, that when you send it in that context, the Docker file cannot seat up. It can only go down, or in that same directory level. So if you wanted to copy files up 2 directories and over, or whatever, you can't. So you wind up that everything in that directory is referenced. And you can use a .docker ignore file, which you can just make one. It's kind of like getignore, format exactly the same. .docker ignore to exclude things. And that means that they won't be included during your copy command, right? So examples of things you would want to exclude, things like reports, documentation, the .git directory is a big one, and node modules, things that are local, things that when your local developers run a build, like if they do npm install locally, you don't want to, when you run a Docker build, you don't want to copy that stuff into the image because the image might be based on a Linux distribution. And when you ran that npm install, it pulled down dependencies that were Mac dependencies or whatever your local machine is. So things that the developers might have done locally, you definitely want to exclude those. The goal is to make the image only contain what you need, and more later on layer caching, but it's used to determine during layer caching what busts the cache. When we get into optimization here, which is the bigger part of the talk, layer caching is a very big deal. And that context directory and below, all the files and all the metadata within it are used to determine if it broke the cache or not. So if you have some files that are changing all the time that aren't even in the image, then exclude them because they might accidentally break your layer caching. So just one of the things to do, look at your context you're sending to your Docker build and decide, do I really need this stuff? And if so, put it in Docker ignore. And don't put too much in Docker ignore in case you, because you can do wildcards, you might accidentally exclude something you didn't mean to. So that's one way you can optimize things. Another best practice is to use labels. Labels can be used to store metadata within your image, such as the git commit hash, the maintainer. You'll see some documentation or some examples that'll have maintainer as its own line. That's now deprecated in favor of labels. You can have multiple label lines, or you can just space delimit them. Here's an example of if I did a label as a maintainer. A lot of times it's useful. I'm about to show you an example here. And at my current placement, we are doing something very similar to this, where we are storing the git commit hash in the image, so we can pull it back out and do a tag on the Git repo when we do an image release or a version release. So here's how this would work. In your Docker file, you got these two lines. It's a build arg, that's the git commit, and then the label. And then during the build, you can send build arg, git log, blah, blah, blah. And then to get the value back out, you can use Docker inspect. So Docker inspect is standardized, and then you can do -f, or you can pipe that to a JQ if you want to get it out as JSON and parse it. But this is an example of how your build during a Docker build could stash that git commit hash in as a label on every image you build, and then you can use that standardized Docker inspect to get that value back out. There's also tons of other metadata in the image if you really need it. Say you want to report on the time that it got built or any of that other stuff. There's lots of kind of neat goodies in there if you want to inspect it. So I've seen where people have been wanting to store things like the git commit hash, like, oh, well, we'll just always stick a file at the root that's called like git commit or whatever, and we just always get that back out. You can just use labels to do that. So I highly recommend using them. That's another key little cool feature there. Document your ports with expose. You saw in the example I had where Nginx said expose 8080, I think it was. This is from the Docker documentation. I copy pasted it. Expose does not make the ports of the container accessible to the host. So when you build an image, if you think about it, you just built an image. It's just a recipe. It's just sitting there. It's just an image that you haven't ran as a container or nothing. Right? It's not until you actually run it that you map host ports to container ports, right? You can map your host 8080 to 8080 in the container. You do it during runtime. Ports, when you have expose 8080 in your Docker file, that does not actually map it at runtime at all. Now, it does deep down in some Docker networking stuff when you've got multiple containers running. They can talk container to container, which is where that's handy. But this is most handy to use as documentation so somebody knows I need to expose 80. or 8080 or 8081 or whatever in your server config, the ports that you said to map this URL to this port or map this to that, use expose to document your ports. So somebody else comes along and they want to run this thing, they can look and see, oh, I need to map this port to that one, but don't think that it automatically does it for you. Just use them as documentation. It's really handy when you're the person who comes around a year later and wants to run that thing. Right on the host, as long as, yeah, I would think so, because I've written plenty where I don't have any exposes. But I've got where my server config is listing on 80 or 8080, and I've mapped host to container and been fine.
So the point is, there's nothing except the labeling.
Well, I don't want to say 100% nothing. From what I looked in the documentation, it said that it mapped container to container when you're running in the Docker network stuff, which I've done very little of. Between container to container, but not host to container, right? So yes, but yeah, use them to document. Anytime you're exposing a port in your app, I highly recommend using expose. That way people know to do that. The difference between copy versus add. Copy and add are the two different ways you can get files from that build context that we set for the build into an image. They're pretty much the same, other than two additional features that add has that copy does not. Add can be a URL. Add will also, if you point it at a zip or any archive, it will auto-extract it. So being that those are really the only two fundamental differences, it's highly recommended, and I copy-pasted that part from the Docker documentation also, unless you're explicitly doing one of those two things, use copy. It lets you know if somebody's using add, they're probably doing it for a good reason. It's like, oh, well, this is a zip, and it's getting extracted and that kind of stuff. So it's just a good practice. I'm not saying the person you're coming behind did that. Maybe they didn't know, but I'm just saying to be on the lookout. That's really the big differences between copy and add. Now, these are the big topics I like to get into because these are the biggest bang for your buck when you're optimizing this stuff. Layer caching. Each line in a Docker file constitutes a layer, and the layers are cached in varlib Docker, basically, on the system that you're running Docker on. They are cached. So what that means is when you reference something, if that thing changed, it's going to bust the cache. Meaning you said copy index.html to this location. If index.html didn't change, it's going to use the cached layer and not actually copy your file in and go to the next line. If that line didn't change, it's going to go to the next line. So what winds up happening is if you run your Docker build, you should be able to run it and it will run and build everything. You should be able to run it again without changing anything, and it should use cache layers for every single thing, unless you're going to go download something from a repo, and we'll get into, there's tricks around that, but for the time being, just think of it as order your changes in your file from the things that change the least to the things that change the most, right? Because those layers, when they get built, then when you push them, only the change layers are what you push. So you really want to keep that amount of layers that change as small as you can, because it helps on your sizes. It also helps on your pushing and your pulling. Build arguments, I had some in there. They're the arg, and when you do build arg. If those values change a lot, like a git commit hash or something, like I showed the example, if they're different, they break cache. So put them as low in the file as you can. And I'm about to show one of my favorite examples for builders that download dependencies. So Maven, Node. I know there's some .NET stuff. I don't remember what it's called that does it. What's the .NET? Like there's a dependency manager thing. Anything that NuGet, right? Anything that does that stuff. Do that in a separate layer, and then copy everything over. I'm going to show a Maven example because I'm a former Docker guy, Maven and a node example. So here's how this would look. For Maven, I'm going to copy my POM, and then I'm going to run Maven verify fail never, because I don't really want it to fail. I just want to, if you've ever done this and done a Docker build with Maven, it downloads the world. Like the very first time you ever installed Maven, this will run that as one line in the layer cache, right? This layer is now cached, right? And then we copy source, and then we run Maven package. If you're familiar with Node, maybe a little bit better, the concept is you're going to copy package star.json, then you're going to run npm install, then you're going to do copy dot dot. That is going to make sure that if nothing changed in package JSON, this layer is going to get cached, and your npm install layer is going to get cached, and then it's going to copy all your code over.
I'm lost without a copy dot dot.
That says copy everything from that host context to my work directory that I've specified.
The
So
two dots are different. First dot is
first argument is host location relative to that context. Second argument is location within the Docker image I'm creating, and that is relative to the work done.
the first is the host based dot.
Yeah, first
Second
argument is
based
host,
on
second is
work
image.
And you mentioned about every line is a layer.
Every line is a
since
layer
I've
that
never,
has the potential to be cached.
yeah, so the first line they're from Maven
Yep.
or from Node. What did that do again?
Those are the image names, and they're the tags of where those exist in Docker Hub or in your own local
So
repo.
it first check your local repo?
It will. If it's pulled them down, it's very, if you, like Maven has this concept of local repo and remote repo. If you've pulled down those images before, it'll just use that. If you haven't, you'll see it doing that, like pulling all the layers. You see it downloading it. So yeah, you're constructing your app, and if you do the ordering the right way, so you need to be conscientious of the order and how you do some of this stuff to optimize using layer caching. You could get by just copying dot dot and then running npm install, right? That would work, but you're going to be, any file changes you made, it's going to break that layer cache in that line and then run npm install every time and bring it down like it never ran it before. And so doing this trick will help you out.
You don't have a version tag on the node tenancy.
Oh, yeah, I
Is
probably
that going
should
to?
have. That's going to pull latest.
That's not going to be able to cache that because is it always going to check for latest?
It will always check for latest. That's a good.
It doesn't check for latest. It will use what you have as the latest tag locally.
Right.
You have to do a poll to get
Exactly.
latest tag has been updated on that server.
Your local doesn't have anything. Obviously.
It's going to do it.
The first
But-
time.
right.
If you had pulled latest at some point, from then on, it's going to use that until you tell it.
If you don't really care, like, you can use latest, but in an I probably should have. That's a good call. If I'm trying to, if I'm trying to show like enterprise best practices, yeah, don't do that. I'll update that slide. That's why I want this to be collaborative, right? Oh, that's another one. Put specific versions and also maintenance versions. Jenkins puts out like weekly builds, but they don't really mark them. They're just different version numbers. You got to look up what their maintenance versions are. So just when you're pinning to specific versions, just make sure you use one of the maintenance.
This layer is such a big thing for Docker things. I want to clarify what I'm learning today.
Yeah.
Every line is a layer.
Yes.
So the first line is you get the image from local or the Docker.
Yes.
The second line is the work directory. That looks to me like a label. That's
That's saying
right?
work. Right.
So that's a layer.
Yeah.
When you build the image.
And
A
if
layer is a layer. I mean,
Yes,
it's just a label. Whenever. So how? Explain to me
Well,
what
the
the
difference
layer
is
is.
if I target the shot of that layer, I will be in that work directory. Whereas if I target the shot of the from node, I'll be in whatever the directory was from that image.
each layer gets a shot, I could probably point that out too. Like they're very long.
So when it's protecting changes,
Yes.
with the work your lines of anything that is in that directory, if it's changed, to affect that.
No, because that,
It's looking at your build context. File.
which means going back to Docker ignore, like when you're saying copy from a particular directory on your host, if you've got files that change in there that you don't really care about, make sure you ignore them or else you're going to break caching and mean.
So the work directory is on your host. The root
No,
is
nope.
in the-
It's in the image.
Okay, that's
And
a
we'll
big
create that
thing
for it, right?
internet. So that's
Yes.
an image.
All,
The copy dot dot, the first one is whatever your current directory on your host. The second dot is that work directory, right?
of the image.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that means whatever you set in your image is USRS, okay.
Mhm.
So if you don't have the work directory, you mentioned something,
You
where
can-
is it again?
You can, well, copy into wherever you were from the image you came from.
Right.
Slow down, wherever you were, what do you mean by that?
It's
Where it
wherever they
left off.
last left you in this image. So
Right.
if whoever built the node image had you
Okay.
in /op and you'll be in /op. If we had it in /,
Image,
you'll
you
be
put
in
it from
/.
the Docker repo.
Yeah, you don't know.
Yep.
You have to
You
look
don't
and
know.
see where are you.
Well, the first one is,
So-
that's the local doesn't have anything. You put it from the repo, the Docker repo. So when you pull that, and then you do not have the work directory. Where is the work directory?
You have to check and see. So what I do when I copy, I always absolutely have to target. There's no question of it. They change
No.
where my work
In the
directory
image, you
is.
can go and poke and know what
You
is.
can. Sure.
Okay, so
But
let's go
you can
back
see
here.
that.
So there's no repo of node. And we have the from node. Let's go to the Docker node. And we do not have a work directory like this one. See one more time. Where does it get? It's just poking the image, whatever
It's
you
from
need to find it,
the
right?
image that you pulled down. Will be in some directory, whatever.
And
they
that's
decide.
defined in the image itself.
Yes.
Somewhere in the line. Okay. Oh, fair enough. Good.
Yes.
Thanks. That's
So
all I
it
need.
sounds,
Yeah.
so it sounds like best practice is always set your work.
Okay.
Yes.
Just
So
like
good.
you can-
Yes. Hey, we came up.
I just want to know what all the
We
things
came
are.
up with another one. Set your work directory.
Because otherwise, yeah, you're dependent. They could
Right.
have changed where they
Well-
were last time they built the image and just broke your whole Docker file.
Well, and think about too, if you're publishing something that someone else is then going to go from, right? They can be at their own, but yeah, that'll be documented there as well. The key point here: think about your layer caching. Think about order. Think about what is going to break my cache where. At some point, obviously, in a build, you're building because something changed, right? You theoretically aren't going to cache every layer, every single build, right? Or else what'd you do? You didn't do anything. But think about at what point you're okay with it. For example, we have one Docker build where I am where we're like downloading, installing like a DB2 client thing, or like doing Yum install stuff or whatever. Like put that stuff toward the top, right? If it doesn't change that often. Yeah.
Have you ever had to like use a debugger while you're running Docker builds?
No. No, nothing that drastic. I'd say for debugging, where things don't go where I thought they did, I've been known to put like run commands, like run ls whatever, or
Yeah.
run echo this thing out, like let me know where I am and what. Then I got to remember to get those out of there.
You should check out the tool on GitHub called
Dive.
really cool because it's a GUI, a command line GUI.
Uh,
You can step through each layer and you can name the files to connect that.
Ooh, that was a lot.
Cool.
Hey,
That
it's almost
sounds
like we
good.
went back in the old days when you put system outs everywhere versus versus
I still do that. What do you mean?
Well, what? Oh, you still? Oh, yeah. You mean you don't still do that?
Debugger.
What? All right. Now we are going to get into multi-stage building, which is a pretty cool concept. So this is a perfectly good working app that we're building with Maven. And then we are exposing 8080 and running it, right? We're building a web app, will work perfectly fine. However, all that Maven stuff is in our image. Do we really need all that around, right? Like all the stuff we use to build it, do we really need it to run it? Nope. So we can leverage multi-stage building. What is that? That is switching that same file to this. So you can say, from Maven, as builder, this name can be anything you want. Try to make it nice and descriptive. I've done other places that help out. So we're saying run all this Maven business, and then from down here, it's a different from. Do copy dash dash from. That name has to match that name. And then the thing it's copying from is relative to where it went within this image. Put all my stuff in here and run it. So now, the image that you would actually push and somebody would go pull and run is just this part. Right? These layers still exist on the Docker host that actually built it. However, you didn't actually package and push them. Your last from down is what actually gets packaged and pushed. Okay? This way, and I'm one place where there's 6 of these. He's digging in there right now. So yeah, you can do where we got to do some Java building, we got to do some JavaScript building, we got to copy some files from an image. That from can be an entire coordinate to an image, and it will auto pull it. Like, so this from can be from Maven blah 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 / location within there. So say there's some published image somewhere that's got some files you need in it. Say IBM has pushed images where they broke something and you need to get a certain script from the previous version. You can do dash dash from the previous versioned image. Like you can do copy from this location, copy that one old script over the new one to patch stuff, right? Like that doesn't have to be a previous stage name. It can be the full coordinates to another image. So I wanted to point that out. That's kind of cool. Hi.
Hello.
Then I'm going to take it one more step further when we're talking about caching here. I want to point out that the from can be the name of the stage. So say you've got a base runtime, you've got a whole bunch of boilerplate config, right? Say your server config, I threw expose 8080 in there. Say you've also got some config like server XML stuff, some anything you've packed within the server that doesn't change, hardly ever. You can stick that stuff up here. This is the same thing I showed you in the last slide. But then this from can be this name, right? So if we're saying this line is going to break my cache, because that's where my source code was, and that's the thing that changed, I could have this stuff down here, and this is kind of, it's a kind of a weak example because that layer is not that big. However, I'm just trying to show you that you can move your base config stuff up, and this from can be the name of a phase. It doesn't have to be from another image. You can take advantage of putting your boilerplate server runtime stuff at the top and actually having 3 stages. So I wanted to point that out. This one is one of the most advanced things I've done. This does work. You can try it at your own risk and see if you like it. If you do have this problem, using layer cache in non-persistent builders. So say, layer caching works perfectly fine on your laptop, right? Those layers are you ran a build and those layers are in Docker on your laptop. Or maybe you've got one build server that runs Docker all day, run Docker commands all day, and those layers are in that file system. But say you're somewhere that runs a bamboo build with 20-some agents that get cleaned up every night, which we have one of those. Say you use a cloud-based builder that spins up a brand new disk every single time it runs a build, you won't get layer caching, right? Because those layers aren't there. You know what I mean? So this has been a problem when people use cloud-based builders that you just spin up and run and tear down and they don't have any persistence. Or if you're somewhere that goes and cleans up your Docker stuff every night and you lose your layer cache every day, here's one way to do it. You can use -- target to build one of those specific stages. You know, I showed you a base runtime and my Maven builder, my Java builder, and then my actual runtime stuff. You can just build those specific things just as images, just doing target. Then you can use from cache to specify an image or a set of images that you want to use as that layer cache instead of what's on disk. This gets pretty heavy, but I really wanted to walk through this because I was so proud that I pulled this off. The overhead is that you're going to push those images to the repo, your images from your different stages. So you do have a little bit of overhead in that those are now in the repo when they weren't before. You threw them out before. Now, if you push those, though, now you can get the benefit of the layer caching. And here's what it looks like. I'll walk through this. So if you do a Docker pull, this is from the previous example. You do Docker pull, and if you tagged it base runtime and do or true, that way, if it first time it ran, you don't actually have it, it can just fail and it's fine. But then if you do a build -- target, this is that phase name, right? And then do cache from that guy and tag it as that. So I'm building this up. See how this cache from is from base runtime and builder, and this cache from is base runtime, builder, and latest. I'm just picking latest. This could be whatever you want. And then at the end, I push them all. No. It's, yeah. You'd like a bit of a loophole? It completely works. Because I'm referencing to cache from something that I'm building, even if it didn't exist.
Right.
Yeah. But, yeah, this works if you want to leverage layer caching, and this will be in the slides that I'll make available to everybody that signed up, if you want to try this out. I got this off of based on, and then I extended it off a tutorial, off of something where I was trying to solve a problem. So I just wanted to make it known, if you're ever wondering or want to play with it, or go, ooh, I saw Ed talk about using target to build a specific phase, or to use cache from. If you ever don't have the ability to use layer caching, and Docker has the ability to let you say, compare this image's layers to my new image's layers, and if they're the same, then just keep on trucking and do it that way. So, if I was going to summarize all of this, optimize your build context, use labels for metadata, use expose to document your ports, use copy explicitly unless you absolutely need to use the features of add, make sure you're optimized for your layer caching, leverage multi-stage building when you can, and for non-persistent builders, do all that crazy stuff I was showing you between target and cache from. And then we also learn always set your work there, and then always use a actual image version.
Those cache from layers should be versioned as well, too, right?
Oh yeah. Now, at least your final image, yes, I've been still just letting them go as builder and Java builder and base runtime, and then the next time they get updated, it does break the cache once, but then the next build just uses it. So I don't really version those, the intermediate stages that I push.
Some images that the Docker team helped you maintain. They specifically asked you not to version them, but if they had to like cache the vulnerability in Java, I don't have a team for specific clear Java thing that they pushed out. They can
really?
My image and fix the vulnerability without waiting for me to apply the patch.
So that brings up a key difference in Docker versus seemingly everything else. You can stomp tags. Like if I build my app 1.0.0 and then a year later push that, build it and push it again, it's going to overlay it. However, it does make a unique content digest hash. There is deep down in there a unique SHA value that represents that new image that you can go, like Nexus or any of the repositories, you can go curl them and go get that value. When you reference an image, you know how you give it the name of it, :version. If you give it the name of it at SHA-256 and that hash, it will pull that specific one and doesn't have to rely on the tag. So if you're somewhere we are that has multiple dev environments that build a tag for that environment and just push that all day, and that's what they get. Orchestration tools like Kubernetes and stuff, if the tag doesn't change, it won't repull. You can say always, and at least in the OpenShift stuff we're doing, like we have to actually like new pods to get them back, like instead of just saying apply. So if the tag didn't change, so we end up pinning it to the SHA-256, the actual, we go look up the every time a push is made, we look up that actual specific content digest actually what it's called. So yes, be on the lookout for that. Who did that the other day to us and we had to do it? I think Jenkins did.
Jenkins did it,
Yeah.
Stomp their stable tag.
I know.
It wasn't stable.
So yeah, then you go run a build that's pinned to Jenkins that version, thinking you're fine. So that's one of the little nits.
And some others that use the tag conversion. Like IBM 9 is the one that's supported. RF is using MQ8. The 8 image was deleted out of Docker Hub.
And then you build from. So that's really all I had to go over. I did that relatively quickly. Again, I like the open discussion stuff. Again, I'm not professing to be an expert, but those of us. Yeah. Yeah.
One that came up recently was an issue someone opened against my repo that I didn't copy with root. Be aware when you're copying crap into your repo and you're going to be running as not root. You're going to have to chown that, or there's a newer version of Docker where you can set flag of what the ownership should be. Although it didn't work on Docker toolbox on Windows, we have an old Docker. Volumes is a big problem for people. If your UID or DID inside the container doesn't match permission on the directory that you're mounting the volume, you're not going to be able to read it.
A lot of containers actually expose. Well, I don't know if this is built into Docker or not, but a lot of containers expose a UID and then GID flag you can set during the container creation.
You can when you go to run it, you can say --user. Here's the user I want to run this at. By default, it's going to run as whatever you tell it to run as in your Docker, which is root if you don't.
Right. Unless you set user, right? User's the declaration of the Docker file that switches the user to. Jenkins does that. They switch to Jenkins. So.
I switched to Gradle.
Right. Yeah.
Surprisingly, the Docker team told me when I said, "Hey, how should I do this?" They had no official position. Shocked. Really? You're okay with root?
Just everything.
Seemed like a good idea.
It's because ideally the container is isolated from the host. But
yeah, but
there was a vulnerability report about long ago where the root escaped the container.
There's that can happen, or even if you don't escape, like there are plenty of images that people probably shouldn't have been running in the first place, where there was bad crap in the image, and now you're root in the image with whatever else someone has decided to file on top of that base image, which might be sensitive.
I left volumes out of here because I haven't used them extensively enough to feel like I could talk to them. Because I feel like people get confused on volumes at runtime versus volume in the image, because the image has nothing to do with the host. Like a lot of times when you're running something, you volume map host location to location in the image. I haven't used a lot of declared volumes in an image to be able to really speak to it, right? Reading the documentation, it said it's any time you know as the software running within your image that you know you're going to modify data within that location. I think Jenkins Home is a decent example, like things that
It's things you want to have outside of the cache that the software running in the image is going to put on disk, in case you decide to like commit the container or something like that. So like Gradle cache would be an example. If you look at the official Maven image, they excluded the .m2 repo as a place, so that can never be written in the cache. But it does have some interesting consequences. Like some people want it to be in the cache, so they don't have to download the internet. Right. A user asking that. You can't unvolume something in a child image if the parent image you have is already made.
There was volumes, and there was one other thing I left off too. I don't get to use that often.
One I was going to ask for opinion on was CMD versus MD.
Yeah, because you. Yeah.
Well, the main difference is, so with entry point, you can have additional commands after it. Or
Now, both of them are the running thing through your process.
they are, but I think entry point, you can still have it, you can still run things after that, or have a separate command after that. But the other difference is
I thought
entry
it
point,
was. Oh, go ahead.
entry point also doesn't have your process running with PID, is it 0 or 1?
Oh, yeah, that way that like tiny stuff has gotten popular because it's something to do with it running with a different number or something like when you, I see where people are overriding.
It ends up that like the parent process is bash instead of your process being the only process. And that can have an impact on how you do logging and things like that.
Oh, the entry point is more clean to override. Like if you have like Maven or Gradle, for example, as your entry point, someone's gonna run like Gradle and then target at some point. Like they're not just gonna be using the default thing you had as your execution.
That's a good point because it does get confusing if you go ahead and do that and somebody's not used to that's how. You got to go dig into what'd you do? Oh, you overrode the entry point on me.
Yeah, like if you wanted to do Docker exec, I think entry point prevents you from. Is it entry point or is it command that prevents you?
You can overload both of them, but with
Only
CMD, all you have to do is say, Docker run is what I want to run instead. With entry point, you have to say dash entry point equals this other thing that I want to run.
And then if you override entry point when you go to do a Docker run, all the commands are the commands to that entry point, right? Right. Like you said, if you override entry point, it'd just be Gradle. When you do a run and then give it what?
I think it tacks on them as arguments instead of completely changing.
I haven't had to override too many of them, like some of the IBM stuff we're using for their builders, they override their own custom scripts.
And could you go back to a slide that has the entry point? Whichever one. Could you move your slide back?
Oh, I have one in
I
here.
want to learn from this guy here. So anyone has an entry point. Okay.
Yeah, this is.
So what is the command here? So
I
you're
usually
replacing
use
that
CMD.
line to something like a Docker run.
In his case, it probably doesn't matter. But I think if the user is going to want to change the command that the container is running, CMD is more convenient.
When you say CMD is looking, what do you mean by CMD?
There's
This is a
CMD.
syntactical layer can change something here or not?
You change the word entry point to CMD. And
Okay,
the
that's
syntax after it is a
totally
little
two different ways to do things. Okay.
There's two ways to have a
Having a CMD and within it you put Docker run or something, whatever you want the command is, right? So let me think. So this is also Java is a command, right? And Java is something a binary on a machine. So what's the difference there?
That'll be your command to run your application within your Docker container.
Yeah, I know, but in the command, we also do something. You have to start something on the machine, right?
It'd be similar. You have CMD, Java, blah, 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 blah,
Okay.
blah. The rest it doesn't have the square bracket, if I remember right.
Okay.
So you're basically.
The first thing different is.
I thought it wasn't, there might be misreading.
No problem. So
Or if you override entry point, you're basically locking it down. Although you can override it.
replacing entry point with CMD, and it's a minor syntax thing. So here's the thing I need to learn from you. What's the difference again?
The difference is
Yeah.
if you as a user need to change the command again. Like, let's say Maven was 15.
Well, let's use this one. Java is a command.
Well, this is a bad example because you wouldn't probably change something like this. You're going to run the app.
Okay, well, go ahead.
So I want to choose a target for Maven, right? Maybe compile or maybe test, whatever thing I need to do. You as the person in the unit, you have to fix something. So I might have done like Maven version or something as my default command that runs. Now I as the user have to override what's in the image to run what I actually want as my target. So you have to say Docker run. If you have CMD, you just say Maven test. If you have an entry point, then I have to say Docker run -- entry point equals Maven. It's longer.
Okay,
They both
okay,
work.
then why do we need the entry point? What's the good of this? What is the good for entry point? There got to be something good. Now you think this can be
I think it's half a dozen, 1/6 another if we're not going to change it. So far,
No, I know.
Oh, okay. This should be deprecated. That's my.
No, I wouldn't say
Okay.
that.
I've seen where, I mean, In a lot of cases, you gotta, when you're extending one of somebody's images, you gotta go dig into their Docker file and see what if they overwrote it or not, especially like with the IBM stuff we've got. What we have to do.
There are containers that implement CLI utilities instead of like a server or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
They almost exclusively use command.
Oh, do they?
Good.
And then it all depends on whether you want your process to be the root process or not.
One we didn't mention we should have is you should never generally have more than one running process in the container.
Right. I agree.
Launch a shell and
Right.
be like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that.
Containers should do one very specific thing.
Which allows you
That's
to
a
run
good.
multiple processes.
You can only have one CMD or one entry point. But I could say CMD point to the shell file, and the shell file is going to launch
It's another
6 different things off.
It's allowed, but it's worst case.
You generally shouldn't do it. I have seen some images out there that run their processes under a hypervisor. Or a supervisor, not a hypervisor, supervisor. Which technically breaks that rule, and I don't know why you would want to do that. But I have seen it done.
I know that in GitLab's case, the official GitLab container runs everything within one container, and that includes the uniform, the web server, the actual Prometheus for health monitoring, what cache was it? Redis for caching. Yeah.
It's all Japan.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think oftentimes when I see those happening, people are taking legacy applications and just trying to very quickly say, hey,
Right.
can we at least get it one step farther? Like they may break it out later,
Right.
but when you're trying to take it one step at a time in a progressive approach.
And I think that I'm a big GitLab fan. I run it at home, and I just recently containerized it. Why I looked into all of that. But for my purposes, I was actually really happy that there's at least a container available. And they stuffed a lot into it that maybe they shouldn't have, but it works, and it actually works pretty well.
One thing that irritates me about GitLab is the Docker runner doesn't let you change the running user. Got so many users filing issues. Because they're doing the volume thing, and it has to be root, not root, I mean, not. They can't change it unless they change the shell runner and run it on Docker. I don't know. Been an issue over the years.
That's actually one of the reasons why, like, I've been building with Docker containers for any of my personal projects, but I'm still using the shell runner to do it for.
That's what I told people to do. I don't know when they're going to fix this.
Yeah.
I got a more basic question,
Okay.
a little less nuanced. So we talked about importance of running, and that makes sense. I can see the benefits of doing it that way rather than having a cache or workflow process and all that stuff. Is there an argument against that in letting like a root tool do your compiling and packaging?
There is in the case, and I'd like to pick some people's brains that have done this. One of the downsides is getting things like test results out of those phases. There's some hokey solutions online where people deliver them to Git, or you could do the example like I did at the very end, and you'd have to version it where you actually push that image and then go pull it and crack it open. So say you noticed in that builder, like if I'm running a Maven build, it's probably executing tests. If you wanted to see your test results, or if it fails in there, it's going to fail the Docker build, right? But then how do I get at what failed? I mean, I can look in the log, but like.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you wanted your whole build to fail, the test fails. Is that what you're doing?
Now, we're like sending stuff to Sonar and checking things that way to where, so this is a trade-off, and that's where I like this collaborative discussion stuff. I've gotten more into, we're in a place where our builder, basically the builders that we get to pick from just have Docker. And so we don't want to maintain this version of Maven, this version of Gradle, this version of this version of that. We just run all our builds in Docker. So we've gotten where your code repository consists of checkout build, checkout code, run Docker build, run the thing. And not relying that the developer has run this command and that command, or that the build has done it. But then we fall into that trap of how do we see all the results? or report on them, or fail to build, or fail a merge request based on this thing. So I'm open to opinion. I've went and made everything giant multi-stage builds. I can't really report on any of those intermediate stages that well. So
I think that's a fundamental problem, not just to slaves that are running the Docker. You did the same thing with like ephemeral OpenStack or something. You have the same problem, right? Once it's done, it's torn down, and all your stuff is gone. I don't know if I have a solution.
no, I know.
I think it's a general
We
problem.
battled that problem, and like my best solution right now is throw it to the sonar runner.
So is that generally what most people are doing now? Is they're using Docker for their build process? But is there not another argument for using like Jenkins and just having a script that runs?
Well, but even in Jenkins, you end up.
So what you want, the reason people are doing this is they want to have scalability of their build pipelines, right? I want to be able to spin up 10 slaves, run a bunch of Jenkins jobs, and then they can go away and someone else use the hardware resources that they've got. That's the
You already have
motivation.
that hybrid. If I understand correctly, you're talking about pushing in get. You're saying just take it out of Maven, right? So you would publish it to some HTTP endpoint so that the results get published out. And what you're saying is
Parts of
you're
it do,
de-aggregating.
like you have a Jenkins master, your logs and all that gets shipped up to the master, even after your slave goes in. But if you need to inspect more stuff, not all of that is simple.
So the way I'm doing that is I'm doing it mainly because of performance, because my tests take too long to run. And so I'm spinning up multiples and then I'm segmenting what tests are running on each one of them. Now, I'm in TFS land, so I actually have to aggregate the data somewhere, pre-aggregate it, and then shove it back to TFS. But because I can't send segmented results, it doesn't the way so limitation of a platform.
But to your point, building inside of Docker containers as slaves is happening all over the place. Jenkins anymore, you're using Docker build slaves to go and not have to install umpteen million dependencies on there. Bitbucket, I think GitLab CI has it. Any of the YAML where you're saying this step, you can declare run that step in this image. Bamboo, you can say pick this image to go run this set of steps inside of. And so it, would spin you up like a Maven running container to run your commands in, and that sort of thing. That would be without doing the multi-state stuff. That's even if I wanted to just run Maven commands and then wanted to go take the resulting jar and put it in something and not do it that way. People are still very much running those steps within a slave, so the person getting the build server up doesn't have to install or maintain all that.
Some of those, I would argue, Docker, it's not a reason to choose Docker. For example, if you're trying to pin the Maven version, I think you should use the Maven wrapper and have in your repository, check out a tag. I did exactly that version of your code, exactly that version of Maven. If I run the build, I'm going to do exactly the output that you got the first time.
Right.
But I think the reason people are choosing those is for performance, hardware, scalability reasons.
I
Granted, if you're not
like the
doing Java,
predictability and the consistency too, right? Which is what you're
If
saying.
you're not doing Java, you might have native crap which you have to have installed, and that's maybe the best solution for that. But for Java specifically, I think there are better ways to solve that.
Did you get the big circle?
Oh yeah. What did you see? Cool. This is the part I like, right? I like us getting together. By all means, I don't want to stand up there and be like, "Well, this is how you're supposed to do it." And it's probably reviewed. Hopefully, I threw out, or you guys all threw out some different nuggets to either be like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," or "I might look that up."
One more.
Yeah.
About combining one thing.
I just read up on this too.
Well, what?
So that's something the Docker guys told me to do.
Concatenate run command, so it's run this command, and this command, and this
So
command.
it's a one layer
In one giant layer versus individual runs. All that has to do with
creating multiple layers.
Right.
And if you don't actually need the intermediate step, you're never gonna jump off that intermediate. There's no reason to have it.
So like in my case, my run command was like downloading Gradle, untarring, all this stuff where think about the next version that comes out, the tar is different, the version's different, it's different right off the top, so none of that crap is gonna help you being in cache. So it might as well just be one node.
I think you want to extract out stuff that changes often, right? I mean, we're talking about
So if there's,
Big
if
and
there's
later
stuff
that-
that doesn't change, it should be in its own run so that it can be cached.
You're right.
But if it is changing every time, there's no point in making the user have to download 10 billion layers, and they're all gonna be different every time anyway.
You
Part
may
of that
want
is
to.
part of that is the art too, because knowing what things are gonna change. Like if Maven's gonna be changing a version, they're a fast changer, you're not gonna wanna put them at the top of your chain, because now all of your subsequent builds are gonna have to be done.
We're all talking about it, Maven's, Jenkins, Java stuff. So, do you deal with a lot of, actually, yeah, that's a little bit higher level. I've never, I'm not young, but, so the Docker, you guys are Windows, Microsoft just started this thing, Windows Container Administrator, right? And this to vary compared to the whole Docker world, this Windows containerization is still maybe only 10% of the whatever containerization inquiry, or it's already half and half. I don't think so.
That you can run Docker on Windows. Like, that is fully supported as far as I know on that.
Yeah, I bet
on Linux.
people use it a lot or not. That's my
Um,
question. Places to work, do they use a lot of Windows Docker at all?
So,
So it's not actually picking up anything yet. Okay, good.
well, so there are two ways
have
of,
application, all of the C# guys. I don't know how many of you guys are doing the C# instead of the Maven thing. Yeah. Go ahead.
but there are two ways of running Docker on Windows. You can actually run Linux containers on Windows, and there's an abstracted virtual machine for Linux that gets run inside of. You can also run,
Scrap that.
right, you
Real
can also
Windows.
run Docker for Windows, so Windows containers on Windows as well. And those are run against, is it like based against like the Windows Tiny Core thing? I don't remember what they call
Well,
it.
it's built into Windows 10 and whatever the Windows Server equivalent of Windows 10.
It's whatever version you're on and whatever versions came before that. So if you're
Okay.
on like the anniversary update, you have the anniversary update and the one before that.
Okay.
So, you have more.
Oh, so in that particular case, inside of that environment, you don't have the Linux commands or the Linux environment. You have Windows and its utilities and the way it
There are a
works.
lot of people using PowerShell command to build their image, like whatever he's using. There are a lot of people in the
Yeah,
combination, why don't they
you
do that?
would use probably PowerShell inside of the container
Yeah.
instead of Bash. or
Place you
equivalent.
work, I don't know where you work here, or are people using, I'm just getting a sense of, is this containerization really only a Linux Java thing, or the
I
C#
I
already
containerized and ran a .NET project.
I
done
can
that, so there are people doing that.
I can speak for
But not a
at least
whole
one
lot.
company with.
I'm sorry?
I'm doing it.
Oh, you get good, so what's your company name?
So, I work at a company out in Easton, and.
On Easton, what's the name of the company?
31 Fifths.
I'll get that, but so you already doing all your C# everything done that
Not,
with the container with.
not at, I would steer away from saying everything. We
Okay.
have.
You started.
Right, so we've started it, we have a project, and in our dev and test environments, we're running on Docker. Now, the particular project I'm thinking about hasn't gone to production, but the plan is to not actually run it in production there because we don't have, well, our dev staff doesn't want to support it in broad in our.
Well,
Our
okay.
our dev staff doesn't want to
We
get
gotta
called,
have
our
monitoring
infrastructure doesn't want to
tools.
support it, right? So, but to the cycle, the process, yes, it works.
And just want to make
And
sure,
it's
so
powered, and we're
the
using
source
PowerShell.
code, we're either some sort of .NET Visual Basic or
It's
it's
core, right? It's
Okay.
not.
Okay, good. I'll actually maybe cut.
I think the biggest problem that you is Linux, more so than the runtime, because what I gather that's pretty solid, is what images do you have available in Docker Hub that are actually built on Windows?
So, yeah, I mean, there's, unfortunately, with a homegrown app, which is what we're using this for, it's a homegrown app that we're building, that there aren't a whole lot of images out there that would work for us. So, we're building on top of IS. So, the IS image is great, and we're working on the latest version of Windows Server 4, so that works great. But we don't need all the other ones. Like, and for example, one thing that's actually limiting us is that Microsoft has not deployed their building infrastructure. They haven't released those as containers. They're still as whatever the previous version of containers that they were using. Names just escaped me. But they didn't release those, so we actually had to go convert it, live convert it, just go look up their source code and say, okay, we're going to create our own containers from that, so that we can build our infrastructure. We have our build infrastructure that matches what would be happening on the cloud. And so we can do it on our local machines. Because when it goes to the build pipeline, that's fine once you check in, but you want to do that all locally.
You are the only one out of this 11 people doing that, okay.
It's a fairly recent thing, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I think.
we're using .NET Core where I am, but it's in Linux containers, not Windows. So I didn't think it applies.
Core is totally different beast. Core is not, if you ask a hardcore .NET developer, they don't think that's really good stuff. You cannot include the Active Directory, all the other PowerShell builds.
I mean, I have a monolith .NET traditional, not Core, that I have running in a container. But it's just,
what I'm talking about
that's
is
on my machine, and
Core only has very, 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 I don't know, only 2% of what you can do with the real PowerShell. PowerShell Core nowadays, probably maybe only 1% of all the other PowerShell functionality.
Really?
They're not about it all the
They're not working on PowerShell anymore. One is supporting Core from now on, right?
And that's in the Windows world, that's different story. If you were inside this kind of
No, I'm saying even for Windows, if you go to the PowerShell.
No, they maintain, well,
I mean,
you're
it
only
ships from
talking about the
Windows.
basic PowerShell. We're talking about all the different modules that Microsoft has built through the years. These people were using for years. But anyway, so that's my understanding there. But thanks for, I'll catch you later. Actually.
Yeah. So we can keep talking and get more beer and stuff, but what I wanted to know as I put this together and tried to get this going, does anybody see it worth and like spread some word around and get together and talk some Docker and show some stuff and see what everybody's doing? And would anybody else want to like do more of a more regimented, scheduled meetup, or is that something people would be interested in? I threw this out
I'm
here.
interested, and we can do it.
So, I don't know. I know the original one that the guys that ran that, it kind of rolled into the DevOps meetup, and
I was going to ask, is there
that'd be fun.
Roll it into the Docker one.
Oh, how about we do containerization and orchestration meetup? Because yeah, Kubernetes is its own other animal that
There's one that popped up on Meetup a week or so ago, but I think we're meeting down like doing this. Check Meetup.com.
maybe we'll put together something that's a little more general. So be on the lookout for that. I do use Kubernetes every day, but I feel like I still know that much of it. Like I get it working and I know enough to be dangerous, and
I want to meet someone that's using Kubernetes using I want to hear how that goes.
yeah.
I don't want to do it.
How do you run Docker effectively?
You can now. It's that. It's,
For Kubernetes 100.
yeah. Kubernetes can run on top of Hyper-V instead of Docker.
There's probably a lot of announcements coming out next week for that. Which also does.
Cool. Well, see, we can all continue to keep talking or whatever, but I wanted to wrap it up and thank everybody for coming. I figured for you guys, I should have warned you. You might want to like lean on something sharp because it's probably all review for you guys. I don't know. Hey, how you doing?
Matt.
What's up?
I forgot entirely about multi-thread. So
Yes.
it helps me to make my containers smaller.
Oh, good. Well, so you did get something out of it.
I did. I forgot about that. So I'm trying to copy this directory and everything that we do with other container. But it's not. Well, you know what? Never mind. I'm good.
You found it. All right. Glad I could help.
Oh,
Sometimes it's
hi.
proximity.
What's up, man? What's up? Wait, nice to meet you. You too. Have we met in person before? I don't remember. I don't know. I've met too many people here. I don't think so. I haven't been to a whole lot of meetups or anything.